The note was folded so small it fit inside her closed fist. My daughter-in-law, Iris, pressed it into my palm under the dinner table while she was pretending to reach for the salt. I felt her fingers squeeze mine once, quick, deliberate, and then she pulled her hand back and smiled at something my son was saying across the table, laughing right on cue like nothing had happened. I kept my fist closed around that piece of paper for a full minute before I dared to look. I excused myself to use the bathroom, locked the door, unfolded it over the sink. 4 words in her handwriting, small and urgent. Don't drink the wine. I stared at it. Read it again. Then a 3rd time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. I'd been married to my wife, Carolyn, for 31 years before she passed. Pancreatic cancer, 2 years ago this November. After she was gone, I sold the house we'd shared in Columbus and moved out here to Phoenix to be closer to my son, Nathan. He'd been after me for years to make the move, said the dry heat would be good for my joints, said he wanted his kids to grow up knowing their grandfather. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect at the time, was that Nathan had been watching my bank accounts for years, waiting. Carolyn and I had built something real over those 3 decades. Not flashy, not inherited. Just 2 people who worked hard, spent carefully, and saved like it meant something. By the time she passed, we had the life insurance, the retirement accounts, the paid-off house. It added up to a number I'd never said out loud to anyone, not even Nathan. Just over $900,000. Enough to live out my years comfortably and leave something behind for the grandkids. Nathan knew roughly what it was. He'd helped me sort through the paperwork after Carolyn died, sat at my kitchen table going through folders with me. I thought that was a son being present. I understand now what it actually was. He came to Phoenix with a plan. I came with a suitcase and a broken heart. The dinner that night was his idea. A small thing, he said. Just family. Him, Iris, their 2 kids, and me. He'd made reservations at a steakhouse out in Scottsdale, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and candles on every table. The kind of place that feels important. When we sat down, Nathan ordered a bottle of wine without asking anyone's preference. A red, something French-sounding. He poured it himself, filled everyone's glass, said something about celebrating. What are we celebrating? I asked. He smiled. Just having you here, Dad. I almost drank it right then. But Iris's note was already in my hand. I sat there in that bathroom stall for longer than I should have. I turned her words over in my mind, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe she was joking. Maybe it was some kind of weird inside reference I wasn't getting. Maybe she'd had too much to drink herself and written it on impulse. But Iris wasn't the joking type. She was quiet, careful, the kind of woman who thought before she spoke. In 3 years of knowing her, I'd never seen her do anything without a reason. I put the note in my shirt pocket, flushed the toilet for the sake of appearances, and walked back to the table. I did not drink the wine. I pushed the glass slightly to the side, and when Nathan looked at me, I said my stomach had been bothering me all day. He nodded, poured himself more, and went back to talking. That was a Thursday. By Sunday, I understood everything. What happened in those 3 days started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. Saturday morning, I came over to Nathan's house to watch the game. I had a key. He'd given me one when I moved to Phoenix, insisted on it. I let myself in through the side door off the garage the way I usually did, and I heard his voice coming from the kitchen, loud enough that he hadn't heard me come in. He was on the phone, and he was angry. I told you it has to look natural, he said. I'm not trying to go to prison over this. I stood in the hallway with my hand still on the doorknob. The policy is clear, he said. If it's ruled accidental, the full amount transfers immediately. That's $960,000, not counting what's in the brokerage account. There was a pause, then his voice dropped. Just be patient, these things take time. I backed out the way I came in. Sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive away. I called Iris from a gas station 2 miles down the road. She picked up on the second ring, and when she heard my voice, she said quietly, "Where are you right now?" "Sunoco on Camelback," I said. "Stay there," she said. "I'm going to take the kids to my mother's. Give me 45 minutes. She met me at a diner nearby. She was wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast, and she sat with her back to the window. She ordered coffee she didn't drink, and she talked for almost an hour. She'd been trying to figure out how to tell me for 3 months. "It started," she said, "when she found a folder on Nathan's laptop labeled with my name. She hadn't been snooping. She'd been looking for a shared grocery list they kept in his documents. The folder was right there. She opened it without thinking and then sat in front of that screen for a long time before she closed it and went to make dinner like nothing had happened. Inside the folder were things that a man doesn't expect his own son to have compiled. Copies of my financial statements going back 4 years, a printout of my life insurance policy, a document with handwritten notes in Nathan's writing about timing, about dosage, about what would and wouldn't show up in a standard toxicology screen, and a text thread. He'd taken screenshots of it and saved them as images, between Nathan and a woman Iris didn't recognize, discussing what she described to me as a plan with a timeline. She hadn't gone to the police yet. She was scared. Nathan had a temper she'd never shown me. She'd seen what happened when she pushed back on things, and she had 2 children in that house. But she'd written me that note because she was running out of time. She thought the dinner Thursday night was going to be the night. When she saw him pour the wine himself and bring it specifically around to my side of the table, she made a decision. I sat across from her in that diner booth and I felt something shift inside me that I don't have a word for. It wasn't grief exactly, though it felt like a door closing on something I'd believed my whole life. It wasn't anger, though the anger was there too, running underneath everything like a current. It was more like a reckoning, a sudden understanding that the story I'd been living in wasn't the story that was actually happening. I had a son who was planning to kill me for my retirement savings. I had a daughter-in-law sitting across from me in sunglasses, shaking slightly, who had decided that telling me the truth was worth whatever came next. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "We're going to be okay," I said. I didn't know if it was true. I said it anyway because she looked like she needed to hear it, and honestly, so did I. We went to the police on Monday morning. I'd spent Sunday calling my attorney, a man named Vincent who I'd used for estate planning after Carolyn died. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting, which was a good sign, and when I finished he said, "Do not confront Nathan. Do not indicate anything has changed. I'm making some calls." Vincent had a contact at the Phoenix PD, a detective he'd worked with on a fraud case years before. We met with her Monday at 11. Detective Chambers was a small woman in her late 40s with a measured way of speaking that made me feel like we were in capable hands. She listened to Iris describe what she'd found. She asked precise questions. She did not seem surprised by anything, which I found both reassuring and quietly devastating that this kind of thing was routine enough not to be surprising. "We need the original files," she said, "and we need you both to be very careful until we can establish what we're working with." Iris had been careful enough not to move or copy anything in that folder. The laptop was still in the house. She'd been going about her days as normally as she could manage, which I now understood must have cost her something enormous. What happened next took 11 days. 11 days of me going about my life, driving to Nathan's for Sunday dinner, watching the grandkids' soccer games, nodding along to whatever he was saying, while Detective Chambers and her team worked. I don't know how I held myself together during those dinners. I know I didn't eat much. I know I watched Nathan's hands when he poured drinks and thought about the note Iris had passed me under the table and how different everything might have looked if she hadn't. The warrant came through on a Wednesday. They found the laptop. They found the folder. They found, in a storage unit Nathan had rented in Tempe under a name I didn't recognize, a quantity of a substance that the detective later told me was used in exactly the way Nathan's notes had described: odorless, colorless, accumulative, something that would have looked, in the end, like cardiac failure in a man my age. Something that would have been easy to miss if no one was looking for it. They also found, in that same storage unit, documentation connecting Nathan to a business partner from 8 years ago who had died under what had been ruled accidental circumstances. The case had been closed. It was reopened. I was in Vincent's office when my phone rang and Nathan's name came up on the screen. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A few minutes later, Detective Chambers called and told me they had him. I sat in that chair for a long time after she hung up. Vincent brought me a cup of coffee I didn't ask for and set it on the desk in front of me and didn't say anything, which was the right call. I thought about Carolyn. I thought about how she used to say that the hardest part of loving someone isn't the love itself. It's the faith that the love is returned in kind. She said it about us, about our marriage, about the years when things were hard and we chose to stay. I thought about how much she had loved Nathan, how she had never had a reason not to. I was glad in that moment that she wasn't alive to know this. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about this kind of thing is simple. Nathan hired a defense attorney who tried several angles, none of which worked especially well. The evidence was specific and documented in Nathan's own handwriting. The business partner case gave the prosecution a pattern to point to. There were texts, there were financial records showing Nathan had already begun the paperwork to shift my assets. He had apparently been confident enough in his timeline to start the process early, which turned out to be a significant mistake. Iris cooperated fully with the prosecution. She moved out of the house with the kids before Nathan was even arraigned, went to stay with her mother in Tucson. I offered to help with anything she needed, legal fees, a place to stay, whatever it was. She thanked me and said she had what she needed, but she'd take me up on dinner sometime. We've had a lot of dinners since then. She's in an apartment in Tempe now, close to her job and to the kids' school. We have Sunday dinner about twice a month, her and the grandkids and me, usually at my place because I've gotten better at cooking since Carolyn passed. We talk about ordinary things, the kids' grades, something funny that happened at her office, whatever game is on. Sometimes we talk about what happened and sometimes we don't. She told me once that she'd been afraid I wouldn't believe her, that I'd think she was trying to cause trouble or protect herself in some way. She said that was the thing that had kept her silent the longest, not fear of Nathan, though that was real, but fear that the truth would cost her the one person in that family she actually trusted. I didn't know she felt that way. I wish I'd given her more reason to know she could tell me anything. Nathan is serving time in a state facility outside Tucson. His sentencing covered 2 counts related to my case and additional charges connected to the reopened investigation from 8 years ago. I don't know what his daily life looks like now, and I've made peace with not knowing. I have no interest in visiting. He's written me once, a letter that arrived through the prison system about 6 months after sentencing. I read it. I didn't write back. I'm not sure what I would say. What I know is this. I moved to Phoenix to be close to family. And family turned out to be something different from what I'd expected, smaller in one way, larger in another. It was an older man eating Sunday dinner with his grandkids and the woman who had risked everything to hand him a folded note under a restaurant table. I was 63 years old when all of this happened. I'm 65 now. Some mornings I wake up and feel the weight of it sitting on my chest, and I have to remind myself that the weight is not grief, exactly. It's gratitude, wearing a disguise. Because I'm here. Because someone in that steakhouse looked at the man across the table and decided that the truth was worth the risk. I've thought about that note a lot. 4 words, don't drink the wine. There's no version of this story where those 4 words weren't everything. I keep the note in the drawer of my nightstand now. Still folded the same way, still the size of a closed fist. I don't look at it very often. I just know it's there. Some nights that's enough to let me sleep. I still think about that note sometimes. Not the words themselves. I've memorized those, but the decision behind them. Iris didn't have to do what she did. She could have stayed quiet, kept her head down, protected herself and her kids, and let whatever was coming. Nobody would have blamed her. Nobody would have even known. But she made a different choice. And I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what kind of person makes that choice and why. Here's what I've come to believe. Nathan was not born bad. I raised him. I know what he was like at 7 years old, at 14, at 25. Somewhere along the way he made a series of small decisions that each seemed manageable on their own. A shortcut here, a rationalization there, until the decisions added up to something he couldn't walk back from. That's how it usually goes. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become the person who poisons their father. They become that person slowly, by choosing convenience over conscience, over and over, until conscience stops showing up at all. What Iris had that Nathan lost was something I can only describe as an inner sense of right that she refused to negotiate with. She was scared. She had real reasons to stay silent, but when the moment came, she knew what the right thing was, and she did it anyway. Not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. That kind of moral clarity is rarer than people think. I hadn't fully recognized it in her until it saved my life. And then there was the way she handled those 3 months of knowing. Think about what that took. She couldn't confront Nathan directly. That would have put the kids at risk. She couldn't go to the police without more than a folder on a laptop. So she watched, and she waited, and she thought carefully about what she actually had and what she needed, and she made her move at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. That's not luck. That's a person using their mind the way it's meant to be used, not panicking, not freezing, but thinking clearly under pressure when everything is on the line. And then, after all of it, the arrest, the trial, the upheaval of her entire life, she rebuilt. New apartment, new routine. Sunday dinners with the grandkids and an old man who's learning to cook. She didn't collapse. She didn't disappear into bitterness, though she would have had every right to. She kept going. That kind of endurance, the quiet, daily kind, not the dramatic kind, is what actually gets people through hard things. I'm 65 years old. I've lost a wife and, in a different way, a son. I have a daughter-in-law who handed me my life back folded into a square the size of her fist. What I want anyone to take from my story is this: the people who survive the worst things aren't the ones who never get hit. They're the ones who know what they stand for, who think before they act, and who keep getting up when everything in them wants to stop. I learned that from Iris. I'm still learning it every Sunday over dinner.